Minoru Yamasaki, designer of the World Trade Center Twin Towers, had a vision of a world in balance. I feel this way about it. World trade means world peace, and consequently, the World Trade Center buildings in New York had a bigger purpose than just to provide room for tenants. The World Trade Center is a living symbol of man's dedication to world peace. Beyond the compelling need to make this a monument to world peace, the World Trade Center should, because of its importance, become a representation of man's belief in humanity, his need for individual dignity, his belief in the cooperation of men, and through cooperation, his ability to find greatness. Minoru Yamasaki, greatbuildings.com. Divine Discoveries at Ground Zero, a multimedia presentation by Connie Baxter Marlow. Presented in Sedona, Arizona, January 16, 2004, Aspen, Colorado, June 28, 2005. An uplifting look at the events of September 11, 2001, that triggered the opening of the human heart and the rebirth of America, with substantiating evidence and perceptions of America. For more information, go to theamericanevolution.com, youtube.com/theamericanevolution. Perceptions of America by Dan Emerson, great-great-grandson of Ralph Waldo Emerson. September 2003, Groton, Massachusetts.
Hello, I'm Dan Emerson. I'm here to talk a little bit about the events of September 11th, 2001. When that tragedy occurred, I was driving on my way to work, and one of the first things I did when I got there, as the events unfolded, was to go online to a site that carries a great deal of many of my ancestor Ralph Waldo Emerson's works. And I downloaded one of his essays, one of my favorite essays, called Compensation. And I would like to read to you from a small part of that, a piece that I think fits maybe the deeper background of the events that led up to September 11th, and what I feel are the deeper spiritual, all the causes. I don't think anything happens kind of in a vacuum, and I think the events that led up to September 11th have a long history, some of which show up in history books and some which don't. But in any case, I felt this quotation out of Compensation gives at least a sense of what I'm referring to. Nature hates monopolies and exceptions. The waves of the sea do not more speedily seek a level from their loftiest tossings than the varieties of conditions tend to equalize themselves. There is always some leveling circumstance that puts down the overbearing, the strong, the rich, the fortunate, substantially on the same ground with all others. Now, to my way of thinking, that in some ways symbolizes what I think at least one aspect of the knocking down of the towers represents. I think for many in this country and around the world, the towers came to represent unfortunately, some of the worst, if one wants to call it that, or the less desirable aspects of American power and prestige. I think the original concepts behind the towers were probably quite noble, but due to man's many vices, greed, power, the tendency for multinational corporations to want to get involved in other countries' affairs, I think all these became emblematic or symbolized by the towers and many other parts of the world, probably no more so than in the Middle East. which is obviously, we know from now, was the source for these individuals who sacrificed their lives for what they probably assumed to be a noble cause, and which led to the loss of 3,000 American lives. My own deeper sense of this from conversations with many people whom I care about and whom I think have great spiritual insight, certainly in many cases far much more so than I do, and whose judgment I'm willing to give at least a penny's worth of trust, was that this event in some ways took place at both the physical level but also at the spiritual level. And that in a way the collapse of the towers, the attack on the towers, provided a release for tremendous resentment, anger, bitterness, hostility, many things that have built up over the last decades, some of them going back to the 1940s and the beginning of Israel and Palestine, other events having to do with the United States involvement in the Middle East in terms of oil, especially oil, which I think is probably one of the fundamental driving forces behind Western countries' involvement in the Middle East, often to the callous disregard of human rights, liberties, and those things which I hold dear and which I think all people who really care about the ideas that founded this country also care about. And so therefore, my sense in a way is that the 911 was something we had coming to us in a way. It's painful to accept that and feel that, and yet in a way I think the people who died there, the families of all those involved, people who in the planes, all were probably playing a role that most of us won't become aware of until we ourselves have advanced to a more spiritual place and understand sometimes the invisible forces behind what we take as material events or historical events. It is my deep belief that the towers provided an outlet and that there was an agreement reached probably at very high levels in the spiritual, sometimes called the spiritual hierarchies. All the great bodies of religion talk about these hierarchies. They don't necessarily use the word hierarchy, but I think in Hindu thought and Buddhist thought, and certainly in the better levels of, or the more esoteric and what I call the clearer levels of Christianity, all talk about these different levels. And it's my sense that while individuals, we have angels that may look after us, that same kind of concept can extend to towns, communities, countries, races, cultures. And I think that at some level, I heard a good friend of mine who was a very spiritual individual had come across a piece, I think on the internet, where apparently the essence of the revelation was along the lines that the angel of America agreed in conjunction with the other angels of, so to speak, for other countries, whether it was Palestine, or Israel, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, to take the hit, to act as the point, the lightning rod for all this, all these forces that have been building up over the many decades. And because the United States is the strongest country in the world militarily and economically and in some other ways, was best suited to take this blow and to handle it, to swallow it, to digest it, and ideally, and perhaps in the long run, transform it from a tragedy and a disaster into a opening, another door opening into better relations between all the world. I think the United States, it's incumbent as the most powerful country in the world, the most influential, and so on, that it take its responsibilities extremely seriously, somewhat on the lines that those who are given much and have much have a great deal of, and to carry out those responsibilities ethically and the highest standards, ethically, morally, and so on. And I think this certainly applies to the United States' involvement in what I think are errors of judgment, perhaps misguided judgment in foreign policy dealing with Palestine and Israel, because I think there are many seeds for this attack on the World Tower that lay to have their roots, so to speak, maybe in the often greatly one-sided support of the United States on behalf of Israel. I think both sides have legitimate rights to countries and autonomy and self-governance, and I think the United States has been playing one side more than the other and has been treating it unjustly, and I think that has been noted around the world. It's hard to see it in the United States because we are biased and influenced by our own media, but aside the fact that we tend to think of everything we do is obviously the best and the right, and that's obviously not correct. All countries have their rights, and I think it's up to the United States as the most powerful country to do its very level best to be even-handed in its treatment of all other countries. I think we can afford to do that. I try to think of it in terms of like a neighborhood. I know that in this neighborhood that I live in, that my greatest strength and security comes from the fact that I have good relations with my neighbors. And that has taken time and effort on all our parts. They aren't people I would necessarily call friends, but we all share common bonds and common interests. And I think this country, if it wants to really make the world a safer place, could learn and extract the same lessons in dealing with this country's neighbors, which are really, these days, all over the world. And that means treating everybody fairly and equitably. And we are the strongest country in the world, and it is our duty and our responsibility to be fair, to uphold the highest levels of conduct, to uphold the highest levels of justice, to stand up for individual rights. And I do not believe our country recently has got a good record in that area. We have done some extraordinary good things throughout the world, but there's much left to do. And there are many, many injustices still being perpetrated. I think we have an opportunity through 911, through the goodwill that that tragedy generated, probably one of the most powerful outpourings of sympathy and compassion for this country that has probably ever existed. And I think that goodwill, unfortunately, has been dissipated a lot by the way the current administration has often acted, I think, arrogantly and unilaterally, and not taken into account the feelings and concerns of other countries in dealing with, certainly with the Taliban, and also even in the case of Saddam Hussein. I think that there are a great many other avenues we could pursue that would lead in the long term to a much safer, more trusting world, and we have the intelligence and the capability to do that. I think the excessive focus on arms and weapons is not the best tool. I think it is a tool. There's no question that weapons and strength and military muscle are necessary elements, but they are certainly only, I think, to be used as the last element. And I think really what counts more are good actions, well-intentioned actions, just actions, as well as just words. And I think until we put our full force behind, for instance, the situation in Israel and Palestine, to put the full might of the United States and the full might of the ideas that underlie our country behind a true seeking of peace within that region and stability, I think until we do that, it's going to continue on as it is. And I think it is probably a question of time that eventually we will put our forces there, but I think it's going to take a lot of conscious action by a lot of people, including myself and others, to help encourage our country to act properly and wisely and to do the right thing in that part of the world. In any case, I think that my great-great-grandfather, when he talked about compensation, had these kinds of things in mind. His insights talk about higher truths, and those higher truths manifest every day. I do not profess to claim any deeper or wiser insight than any other ordinary individual, but I think all around us there are many teachings, many books, many pieces of art, writings, and so on that talk about these higher truths and that all of us have access to. And I think it behooves us to study those and to work with those. A lot to work on, but I think that's part of the human voyage. I think this 911 is a reminder and a wake-up call, and I hope that we all use it in the highest, finest way we possibly can and put these lessons to good use and realize that revenge and the eye for eye motif only incurs more eye for an eye, and more justice, as my great-great-grandmother said, brings justice, and injustice, injustice. And I think that is the truth, has been the truth, and always shall be the truth. And anyway, that's kind of, in a way, a summation of how I feel that 911 represents a certain manifestation of forces, emotions, and passions that have been long contained and has now become a doorway that allows us to move forward. And that's what my hope and prayer is. And I hope you and all the rest of us who feel the same way will do our best to be more compassionate toward our fellow human beings and to reflect that at the highest levels of our government through the use of our votes. And we're a democracy, and we have the power through the vote to carry out those wishes and to have our government reflect the best and to insist that they stand up to it, because they are our representatives around the world, whether we like it or not.